Okay, guys, you have now completed the Unit 2-3 SAQ revisions, and very shortly you will be able to access your revised scores inside of Turnitin.com. And this video will serve as some feedback and just some like, hey, what went well, what didn't go well in terms of SAQ revisions. Now, the first thing I want to point out to you guys is that on revisions, on these rewrites, I do not mark these up the same way as I did before. You have all the feedback on what needed to be done in the original draft version. However, if you want more information on how you did, how things went, yada yada yada, set up a conference with me. We can break down your writing on the revised writing, so something that would be a new conversation, and I can get you some more detailed expressed feedback verbally but not in writing form. This video will serve to give you the best answers, not the only answers, but the best, most common answers, and why these answers worked for each one of the three SAQ bands. And I'll talk you through some of the things that I saw as a reader that we can tighten up or that went well with regards to your revision. So let's just hop right into this thing. Not a very fancy presentation. Let's talk SAQ 1A. Want to identify and explain one example of cross-cultural technological transfer. A lot of people who got caught out by this question, both in the first writing and the revisions writing, was the wrong AP theme. So remember, we have various AP themes. Religion is culture and not technology. So people who get caught out with this one sometimes put in like Buddhism transfer. That's true, factually accurate, however, not technology. Same thing would go with trade goods. That's more of an economic piece than technology. What we're looking here is for transfer, and you have to prove that a transfer occurred. You can't just identify that the transfer occurred. You have to prove the transfer occurred by giving an illustrative example. So the best answers that you guys came up with that I could identify include: the Latin sale starts in the Arab world, goes to China, evidenced by its inclusion in the junk. There's the proof of transfer. The stern post rudder starts in China, goes to the Arab world. It's evidenced of transfer because it was included in the Dow. The other answer that I saw a lot, and this one proved to be harder for people to prove, was the magnetic compass. So yes, absolutely starts in China, definitely goes to the Arab world. In the Arab world, it's used to create early clocks. The Arabs also transfer that technology to the Europeans via the Reconquista, and the magnetic compass is a huge piece of technology used at the School of Navigation that was responsible for the Portuguese making their way into the IOTN. But the transfer still occurs as a result of the IOTN. China to the Arab world into the Abbasid Caliphate, into the Sultanate of Cordoba, and then in Cordoba, eventually that technology will fall into the hands of the Portuguese and the Spaniards, who will then utilize it. Proof of transfer. The School of Navigation is established in 1415, which puts us well within our 1450 date, right? So the key here was proving the transfer for most of you guys. You're going to go back, you're going to look at your answer, you're going to be like, I totally said that. You didn't prove the transfer. You have to prove the transfer. Otherwise, you're not fully addressing the prompt. Okay, let's talk 1B. Silk and porcelain, totally a great answer. Camel sandals, totally a great answer to this question. Go back and look at the Unit 2 feedback video. This question basically word for word right out of that Unit 2 SAQ. So those of you guys who utilized all the feedback landed on those answers. Great. Another great answer that I saw: the large empires that were established that brought the two polar ends, the east and the west of the Silk Road, together. So if you talked about the Song dynasty beating back groups of people like the Jin and spreading further and further west, and then you talked about the spread of Islam and the creation of Dar al-Islam, which provided more sanctuary and stability in the western part of the Silk Road that pushed further and further east, as evidenced by places like Samarkand or the Khwarizmian Empire, which was an Islamic trade empire. That totally would have worked as well. A lot of people landed on the Mongols, which is a great answer. The Yasa system, which was their law codes, would be proof that they were able to increase trade. Very, very harsh punishments, beheadings, summary execution, beatings for people who try to engage in bandit activities. The Yam system establishes a Mongol presence on the Silk Road. That's a like ancient postal system with all the way stations, Mongol soldiers all up and down the road. So there's always a Mongol military presence. The gold plate example, the story of the woman who could walk the entire length of the Silk Road with a gold plate on her head and never be attacked would work. And then lastly, I didn't put it in here because I was running out of space on the slide, but the caravanserai. Or the banking houses. Those ones totally work as well. Those weren't as common answers, but those ones would totally work as well. And then you just have to explain why any one of these examples would increase trade, right? Luxury goods and demand for luxury goods, speed and capacity increases as a result of the camel saddle. And then, as we talked about before, with large empires, or the Mongols providing more safety and stability. 1C, analyze one difference between the IOTN and the Silk Road from 1200 to 1450 CE. The best answer, the one that you can totally prove, that is a difference, and that's the key. There was a lot of people who still missed that keyword and talk more about similarities, was the transfer of bulk goods versus luxury goods. So when we're talking bulk goods, we're talking like wood or bananas or cash crops like cotton that could be loaded up on the ships, and those ships could carry those goods very quickly from market to market and high volume, right? Camels can't carry a lot of wood. Camels can't carry a lot of cotton. Bananas will rot because the camels are too slow. So the bulk goods and the transfer and trade of bulk goods was made possible by the IOTN versus the Silk Road, which really specialized in luxury goods because you're not going to flood the market. Think about your basic market principles and scarcity: less silk, less porcelain in the market maintains a high price point, which means that you can have more profitability. Also, those items don't like spoil, and so it doesn't matter how quickly you get them to the market. So the transport piece was important. People talked about like dhows and junks and camel saddles and all that sort of stuff. Like that's true, that factors in, but you have to link it back to the bulk goods. And then inside of the analysis, one of the key differences that we can see as a result of this different types of transfer is that the over time, the IOTN will create more demographic change, especially with the transfer of food crops. Like bananas coming out of Southeast Asia, which is the best illustrative example, making their way into the Swahili coast of Eastern Africa. And then over time, more people surviving, which creates a population increase. There's not more people alive because of silk, but there are certainly more people alive because of bananas during this time period because of the caloric intake and resulting population boom because people aren't dying from malnutrition. So that's a good illustrative and analytical point that could be made to get the answer, right? There are other answers for this one. So if you have questions about what you wrote, definitely seek me out. Let's talk about number two. In number two, you read the stimuli that I've included here. In 2A and 2B, the author makes the point, you back the point up. And then in 2A, notice the verbiage describe. So all you had to do is break down and describe one instance of a Central Asian nomad group. Think the Mongols, that's the easiest one, but we could also roll with the Ottomans, providing new emperors, sultans, or sons of heaven. Well, sons of heaven would be like an homage or a nod to the mandate of heaven. So the easiest answer is the Mongols taking over China and establishing the Yuan dynasty. Now, some of you guys might be like, I totally wrote that. But if you have factually incorrect information inside of your evidence, it will cost you the point. Genghis Khan did not take over the Song dynasty and create the Yuan dynasty. Genghis Khan never was the emperor of China. His great grandson, Kublai Khan, was the emperor. And as a result of that, factual information and accuracy, you may not have gotten the point. The other really easy go-to example would be the Ottomans. The Ottomans taken back over after the Ilkhanate sort of fades away. Someone like Osman establishing rule over what was the leftover pieces of the Byzantine Empire and the Ilkhanate would work, or Mehmet moving in and taking over Constantinople would work as well. I know that's like 1453 and we're at 1450. But if you hit the Mehmet one, I gave it to you because the siege of Constantinople starts before 1453 and Mehmet ultimately is successful. So in this case, I felt like that was a strong enough example that would work there. All right, 2B. Explain one way in which, as the author asserts, the interactions between Central Asian nomads and established Asian civilizations resulted in one group vanquishing their conquerors. The way this was written, Mrs. Dumas and I took a couple of different answers. You could talk about the Ming Dynasty, which rose up against the Yuan Dynasty, ultimately destroying the Mongol Yuan Dynasty and establishing a more traditional dynastic China. That would totally work. You could have the Persians who beat back the Mongols and assimilate them, as evidenced by farming and the adoption of Islam. That would totally work. Or you could go the opposite route, and we took answers where the Mongols totally destroyed the people who they were taking over. The way the question was originally worded was slightly confusing, so we gave you the or on this one to make it fair for everybody. I would have taken an example like the Mongols destroying the Abbasid Caliphate, the siege of Baghdad. That would have totally worked. Cutting off of Russia from the rest of Europe and Asia, as evidenced by sieges at places like Novgorod and the surrender or die policy. Which essentially broke the Russian monarchy and created a Mongol tributary state in Russia. I would totally take that one. Or the destruction of the Song dynasty by Kublai Khan, and the destruction of the traditional Confucian system for about 150 years, and the removal of Han persons' ethnicity from any of the social ranks. I would have taken that one as well. So we took an either or on that one because of the way the question was originally worded. 2C, identify and explain one example of cross-cultural diffusion that happened as a result of the contact discussed above by the author. The easiest, best example of this was Mongol religious tolerance, which allowed the spread of two religions in particular, which could easily prove cross-cultural diffusion. The Mongols famously were religiously tolerant because they were animists. They didn't have any connection or any really strong feelings about other people's religion. They weren't trying to spread their religion because their religion was very much a part of the steppe and where they were from. Over time, though, we see the expansion of Christianity into the eastern sections of the Mongol or western sections of the Mongol Empire and almost into Central Asia as well. That's evidenced by Nestorian Christianity, a sect of Christianity that has much more of an Asian practice that starts to be a little bit more syncretic with regards to ancestor worship, but totally would have worked as evidence of cross-cultural diffusion. The easiest, best answer, and many of you who landed on this one, was Mahayana Buddhism coming out of Tibet, making its way into southern China. The Mongols were very much intrigued by Buddhism. They allowed Buddhism to spread. Buddhism had been walled off by Confucian scholar gentry. It wasn't part of the governing philosophy that connected to ancestor worship and the mandate of heaven. The Mongols didn't care about any of that stuff. They let Buddhism come in, and then Buddhism remains even after the Mongols leave. Okay, so Mahayana Buddhism, definitely the number one answer there that I saw. It totally works, and it is proof of the spread of cross-cultural diffusion. Lastly, SAQ number 3, and then we'll be done with this thing. Taking a look at our picture, this is a religious gathering, but the way you analyze the picture matters, and there are multiple answers that could be given. So despite the fact that this is Akbar reigning over a religious council, as evidenced by all the different people and the clothing that they're wearing, if you didn't pick up on that piece, you're not going to be doomed to not get the point. Answers that were taken and that were well done included the bureaucracy. That would be the Matsubari system. If you're not listening to podcasts, that's where we hit on some of this stuff. Mrs. Dumas also hit on it in her video lecture. Listen to the podcasts, consume the content, consume the material. It matters, all right? Now, if you broke down the Matsubari system, but you didn't remember the name, you talked about this top-down system where the emperor had a lot of control, or the sultan had a lot of control. He exercised it over landholders who then paid him back tribute. I totally gave you that one, okay? You could talk about the tribute system in and of itself. That would be the zamindar tax collecting system, where large amounts of rent were extracted from landowners, people who had these large plantations, as a way of exerting control rule over the people. You could have interpreted the man here in the white turban handing over money or some form of tribute to the Sultan or a representative of the Sultan. And so I could totally see that being tribute and gave you credit for that. Zamindar, again, use the content vocabulary. It's the easiest way to prove your point, and it is specific. All right. However, this is the best answer is religious tolerance. This is a meeting of multiple different religious leaders who are discussing religion, this idea of religiosity that existed inside of Akbar's Mughal empire. Eventually, he will try to form his own type of religion that would be proof of religious tolerance, although most people went with this no jaisa tax and the ability of people to petition the state. And I totally took that as an answer. No jaisa tax would be your proof, which would get you the point. In the period 200 to 1750, let's talk about another group of people. The easiest, best answer, because you already talked about one gunpowder empire and 3A, is to go to 3B and hit up the Ottomans, all right? Because that's an apples to apples comparison. Then, and here's where a lot of people got caught out. If you talked about, let's say, religious tolerance in 3A, then you have to talk about the similar method in 3B, right? They need to be an apples to apples comparison. So let's go with bureaucracy. If you talked about the Montabari system, then talk about the Ottoman organization system from the Sultan down to the Pasha to the Timurids, all the way down. So you're going to do that same sort of bureaucratic system. And then for both of these, you're going to talk about why it allows the state to have more control. It allows for more expansion of state programs, like let's say like arts or architecture or some of the various cultural endeavors that were huge in both these empires. A lot of people talked about that. If you talked about tribute and you talked about the zamindar system and how the zamindar tax collectors went out and forcefully removed or extracted tribute from farmers, then you need something similar, forcible extraction. The best example of that would be the Devshrim in the Ottoman Empire, the removal of Christian boys who then became Janissary super soldiers inside of the Ottoman Empire. That is an apples to apples tributary comparison that would totally work. And then again, religious tolerance. If you want religious tolerance 3A, go religious tolerance in 3B. The Ottomans allowed for the millets. A lot of people talked about the millets and the Dahimi, the people of the book, and they had the same basic beliefs as Muslims. So why not allow the Christians and the Jews to practice their own religion? However, there was still a jizya tax or jaisa tax that was extracted in the Ottoman Empire, different than what we see here, but it's not a big enough difference to say that this is more of a contrast than a compare. So you could totally have that. The millet system is the best possible answer there. And then finally, 3C, analyze one economic difference between the empire represented above and another empire. I stuck with, and a lot of you guys did too, Ottomans versus Mughals. Talk about the trade regulations, right? The Mughals did not regulate trade. They extracted a certain amount of tax from each transaction, about 2.5% per transaction, but then heavily taxed people on the back end, whether it be the Zamindar tax collection system that could run up to 90% of total taxation, or personal wealth or value. So individual trades were taxed at a lower rate, but personal wealth was taxed at a higher rate. Inside of the Ottoman Empire, though, we saw that there were relatively low amounts of taxation, but there were caps on profit, about a 10% cap on the profit. So we see the market being regulated in a different manner. All right. The Mughals are way more free and open trade. The Ottomans are going to be a way more regulated trade. Another great way of breaking this thing down would have been the trade officials that the Ottomans employed, the standard weights and measures, and then the restriction and prohibition of trading of certain resources, specifically in the Ottoman Empire. Trading wheat or foodstuffs or gunpowder was restricted. Why? Because a lot of people buying Ottoman goods were Europeans. The Ottomans were at war with the Europeans, and so you don't want to trade food or weapons to your enemy and support them in some way, right? So the Ottomans totally walled off the transfer of certain technologies and foodstuffs as a way of both promoting a healthier, safer empire for themselves and as a way of hurting their enemies. All right. So with that, that is the end of the breakdown of the SAQs. If you have any questions, one more time, feel free after 24 hours. So that would be Tuesday, November 10th. Feel free to hit me up. We can talk about your SAQ. I can set up a Google Meet. We can record it. You can have the feedback for yourself. If you have any questions about why you may or may not have gotten the point on something, that would be the best way to do it. Remember, turnitin.com will not have a ton of feedback in it because I did not give a ton of feedback this time around. All right. Thanks, guys, for watching this thing. We'll talk to you next time. Bye.